The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken promises. Marcus Brennan sat behind the bench, his expression carved from stone as another couple tore each other apart with words that once might have been "I love you." He'd heard it all before, the accusations, the tears, the desperate attempts to salvage something already dead. Marriage, he'd concluded long ago, was simply a contract people signed before they knew better. "Mr. Harris, the court recognizes your claim," Marcus said, his voice flat and efficient. "Mrs. Harris, you'll retain custody on weekends. Division of assets will follow standard protocol." The gavel came down with finality. Another marriage dissolved. Another file closed. He felt nothing. His clerk, a young woman named Sarah who still wore her engagement ring with pride, placed the next folder on his desk. Ashford vs. Chen. High-profile divorce. Tech billionaire Victor Ashford and his wife Sophia. She paused. Sophia Chen. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. His pen stopped mid-signature. Sophia. It couldn't be the same person. But when he opened the file and saw the photograph attached to the preliminary documents, 15 years collapsed into a single moment. Those eyes. Still the same warm brown that had once looked at him like he hung the moon. But everything else had changed. The carefree artist with paint-stained fingers had become this elegant woman in a designer suit, her hair swept back in a perfect chignon. She'd married a billionaire. She'd moved on. Of course she had. Marcus's brother James appeared in his chambers during lunch, uninvited as always, carrying takeout and concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost," James said, setting down sandwiches Marcus wouldn't eat. "I need to recuse myself from a case," Marcus admitted, staring at Sophia's file. James glanced at the name. His eyes widened. "Sophia? You're Sophia? The one I let go?" "Yes." Marcus closed the file sharply. "I chose law school over Paris. Over her dreams. Over us. I made my choice, and I've lived with it. By punishing every married couple who walks into your courtroom." James asked softly. "Mark, you became a judge to help people, remember? You believed in justice, in fairness." "I believe in reality," Marcus corrected. "Marriage is a legal contract that statistically fails more than half the time. I process these cases efficiently because someone has to face facts." But even as he said it, his hand rested on Sophia's file like it might disappear. That night, Marcus sat in his empty apartment, all clean lines and no photographs, and remembered. Sophia laughing in a tiny studio apartment, her canvases covering every wall. Her hands cupping his face the night he got his law school acceptance letter. "Go," she'd whispered. "Chase your dream. I'll chase mine in Paris. We'll find each other again." But he'd been afraid. Afraid that love couldn't survive distance. Afraid that choosing her meant abandoning his future. So he'd ended it cleanly, cruelly, telling her that Paris was a fantasy and she needed to grow up. He'd watched her heart break and told himself it was for the best. Now she was in his courtroom, and he had to decide, recuse himself and let another judge handle her case, or face the woman whose trust he'd destroyed and prove he could still be impartial. Marcus opened his laptop and read the case summary. Victor Ashford was demanding everything, claiming Sophia had been unfaithful, that she'd manipulated him, that she deserved nothing from their 10-year marriage. The accusations were vicious, detailed, designed to destroy her. Something cold settled in Marcus's chest. He made his decision. He would not recuse himself. He would hear this case. And he would prove that at least in his courtroom, justice still mattered, even if he'd failed to find it in his own life. The next morning, Marcus informed the court of his decision to proceed. Sarah looked surprised. "Sir, given your prior relationship." "Was 15 years ago," Marcus interrupted. "I can be impartial." But as he said it, he wondered if he was trying to convince Sarah or himself. The courtroom filled with an unusual tension the morning Sophia Chen's case began. Reporters lined the back rows, eager to witness the downfall of Victor Ashford's wife. Marcus watched from the bench as the doors opened, his heart beating irregularly for the first time in years. Sophia entered flanked by her attorney, Diana Wu, a formidable woman known for taking impossible cases. But Marcus barely noticed Diana. His entire attention fixed on Sophia as she walked down the aisle, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She wore a simple navy suit, no jewelry except a delicate watch. Nothing like the extravagant wealth her husband's empire suggested she should display. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Marcus saw something flicker in her gaze, recognition, yes, but also something deeper. Pain. Resignation. Then she looked away, taking her seat with practiced grace. Victor Ashford arrived 10 minutes late, clearly intentional. The tech mogul commanded attention effortlessly, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting power. He didn't look at Sophia once as he sat across the aisle, surrounded by a team of 5 lawyers. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Marcus took his seat, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We're here for the dissolution of marriage between Victor Ashford and Sophia Chen. Counselors, your opening statements." Victor's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Garrett, launched into an aggressive attack. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of deception. My client, a respected innovator and philanthropist, was manipulated into marriage by a woman who saw only dollar signs. Sophia Chen was a struggling artist with nothing when they met. She pursued Mr. Ashford relentlessly, fabricated a persona of sophistication, and once married, proceeded to betray his trust." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He'd heard similar accusations 1,000 times. Bitter spouses always painted their partners as villains. Garrett continued, presenting email chains, photographs, testimony from household staff who claimed Sophia was cold and distant, always traveling, never home. She abandoned the marriage emotionally while enjoying its financial benefits. "My client asks only that she leave with what she brought, nothing." When Diana stood to respond, her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Your Honor, what Mr. Garrett describes is not deception but survival. Sophia Chen didn't pursue Mr. Ashford, he pursued her relentlessly after seeing her artwork at a gallery. She was a successful artist, not a struggling one. The emails Mr. Garrett references are taken out of context, and the staff testimony comes from employees who faced termination if they didn't cooperate." Diana clicked a remote, and images appeared on the screen. Sophia's paintings, breathtaking landscapes and portraits full of emotion. This is who Sophia was before marriage. An artist with gallery representation in 3 countries. And this, another click showed a stark, empty studio, is what happened after. Mr. Ashford systematically isolated her, criticized her work, convinced her that her art was worthless. He controlled every aspect of her life under the guise of love. Marcus found himself leaning forward, his professional detachment cracking. He remembered Sophia's passion for painting, how she'd see beauty in everything, a cracked sidewalk, afternoon light through dirty windows, his face while he studied. Over the next 3 days, the case unfolded like a psychological thriller. Diana presented evidence of Victor's controlling behavior. Bank accounts Sophia couldn't access, friends she'd been forbidden to see, emails from Victor berating her for wasting time on her art. Staff members testified that Victor monitored Sophia's phone, her movements, her conversations. But Victor's team countered with their own narrative. Sophia photographed at charity events looking happy, Sophia's own emails thanking Victor for his guidance, financial records showing she'd spent lavishly on clothes and travel. Marcus observed Sophia throughout. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression neutral. Only once did her composure crack, when Victor's lawyer displayed one of her paintings and called it amateurish indulgence. Her fingers tightened briefly before relaxing again. On the 4th day, Diana called Sophia to testify. Marcus watched her approach the stand, and for a moment, time folded. He saw the girl she'd been, nervous before her first gallery showing, grabbing his hand for courage. "Ms. Chen," Diana began gently, "why did you marry Victor Ashford?" Sophia's voice was quiet but steady. "Because I'd stopped believing in love. I thought maybe respect and stability were enough." Her eyes flickered to Marcus, then away. "Someone I once trusted taught me that love was impractical. So I chose practicality." The words landed like an accusation, even though Sophia's tone remained neutral. Marcus felt his chest constrict. And did you find respect and stability? Diana asked. I found a beautiful cage, Sophia replied. Victor didn't want a wife. He wanted a trophy he could polish or put away as needed. When I tried to paint again 2 years into our marriage, he donated all my supplies to charity while I was visiting my mother. He said he was helping me move forward, but he was erasing who I was. Victor's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Diana's evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed Victor had secretly moved assets into offshore accounts Sophia couldn't touch. He'd documented her every movement through household security cameras. He'd even drafted a post-nuptial agreement she'd never seen, designed to leave her with nothing if she ever filed for divorce. As the testimony concluded, Marcus realized he was witnessing something he'd stopped believing existed, someone fighting not for money, but for dignity. Then Diana dropped her final piece of evidence. Your Honor, we've uncovered something that changes everything. A document that proves Mr. Ashford's intentions from the very beginning. She approached Sophia, who reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed manila envelope, aged and slightly yellowed. Sophia's hands trembled as she held it. Marcus felt a strange premonition, a tingling at the base of his skull. What is that document? He asked, his voice rougher than intended. Sophia finally looked directly at him, and in her eyes, he saw 15 years of hurt and hope tangled together. It's a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor. One I had drafted 13 years ago, after. She paused. After I learned that love without protection is just another way to get hurt. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Sophia held the envelope. Marcus couldn't breathe. 13 years ago. Right after their breakup. Right when he'd finished law school and taken his first position at a small firm, desperate to build his career and forget the girl he'd left behind. Diana took the envelope from Sophia's trembling hands and approached the bench. Your Honor, this prenuptial agreement was drafted by attorney M. Brennan in 2012. We'd like to submit it as evidence. M. Brennan. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered now, remembered with sudden, devastating clarity. A young woman had come to his tiny office, hat pulled low, sunglasses hiding her face. She'd asked about protecting herself before marriage, her voice hollow. He'd been so consumed by his own misery, so focused on proving he'd made the right choice by choosing law over love, that he'd barely looked up from his paperwork. I need to know, she'd whispered, if there's any way to protect yourself when you've stopped believing in fairy tales. He'd drafted the prenup mechanically, professionally. Standard clauses about asset division, infidelity protections, good faith requirements. But he'd added something unusual, special provisions that would activate if one party could prove the marriage was entered into under false pretenses or with intent to defraud. The woman had paid in cash and left. He'd filed the paperwork under J. Smith, the fake name she'd given. He'd never seen her face clearly. Never knew. Diana handed him the envelope. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. His own handwriting stared back at him from 13 years ago, younger and more certain. And there, on the final page, 2 signatures, J. Smith in Sophia's distinctive handwriting, and his own, Marcus Brennan, attorney at law. Below Sophia's signature was a note in tiny letters, for when I'm ready to try again. So I won't forget what it feels like to be broken. Marcus looked up at Sophia, and she met his gaze without flinching. She'd known. She'd known it was him that day, even hidden behind sunglasses and a fake name. She'd come to him in her darkest moment, and he'd helped her without even realizing. Your Honor. Diana's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. The prenuptial agreement contains specific provisions about disclosure of assets and good faith entry into marriage. We believe Mr. Ashford violated every single clause. Victor's lawyer Garrett jumped to his feet. Objection. This supposed prenup was never filed with a marriage license, never acknowledged by my client, never. Never needed to be, Diana interrupted smoothly. According to state law, a prenuptial agreement is valid if both parties sign it with notarization, regardless of when it's revealed. Ms. Chen had this document notarized and witnessed. She kept it sealed for 10 years, hoping she'd never need it. But when Mr. Ashford filed for divorce and attempted to paint her as a manipulator, she realized it was time. Marcus forced his voice to remain steady. Ms. Chen, when did you have Mr. Ashford sign this document? Sophia stood, her composure finally showing cracks. 3 months before our wedding, Your Honor. I told Victor the first needed him to sign some insurance paperwork. He signed without reading it. He signed everything I put in front of him without reading in those days because he trusted me completely. Her voice broke slightly. Or so I thought. That's fraud. Garrett shouted. She deceived him. She protected herself, Diana countered. And it's fortunate she did, because this prenup required full financial disclosure from both parties within 30 days of signing. Mr. Ashford disclosed his primary accounts but concealed 12 offshore trusts, for shell corporations, and a real estate portfolio worth over $300 million. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Victor's face turned crimson, and he leaned forward to whisper furiously to his lawyers. Marcus read through the document carefully, his mind split between his judicial duty and the memories flooding back. The special provisions he'd written were brilliant, he could admit that now. They created a burden of good faith that required ongoing honesty, not just a one-time disclosure. Any concealment of assets during the marriage would be considered breach of contract. And Victor had concealed everything. Furthermore, Diana continued, presenting her tablet to the court, we have evidence that Mr. Ashford began hiding assets within 6 months of marriage. He created the first offshore trust in the Cayman Islands specifically to shelter wealth from any future divorce. He documented this intention in emails to his financial advisor, stating, and I quote, "Marriage is temporary, but money is forever. Protect accordingly." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in his courtroom in years, righteous anger. Not the cold dismissal of foolish romantics, but genuine fury at someone who'd used the legal system to trap and exploit another person. Sophia had come to him broken, asking if paper could protect a heart. He'd given her the legal tools, never knowing they'd end up back in front of him, the judge who'd stopped believing in what those tools were meant to protect. Ms. Chen, Marcus said carefully, why did you keep this prenup secret for 10 years? Sophia's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Because I kept hoping I was wrong about people, Your Honor. I kept hoping that maybe Victor married me for more than appearances. That maybe the lawyer who once helped a broken stranger believed that love could still exist, even if it needed legal protection. She paused. I kept hoping that choosing safety over passion didn't mean I had to live without either. The words hit Marcus like a confession and an accusation woven together. She was talking about Victor, but also about them, about the choice Marcus had made 15 years ago when he'd picked certainty over the beautiful uncertainty of loving her. Victor stood suddenly, his polished demeanor cracking. This is absurd. That document is fabricated, and even if it isn't, it's irrelevant. I want this case concluded today. I have a board meeting tomorrow in Singapore, and I've wasted enough time on this. Sit down, Mr. Ashford, Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone that made the billionaire freeze. You'll stay in this courtroom until these proceedings are concluded, even if it takes weeks. Your board meeting is not my concern. Justice is. It was the first time in years Marcus had used that word, justice, and meant it as something more than efficient processing. He looked at the prenup again, at his younger self's handwriting, at the careful provisions designed to protect someone he'd never expected to see again. And he realized that some part of him had never stopped being the man who believed that love, even wounded, deserved protection. The question now was whether Judge Marcus Brennan could honor what attorney Marcus Brennan had created, and whether, in doing so, he'd find a way to protect not just Sophia's assets, but the truth both of them had been running from for 15 years. Marcus called a 30-minute recess, retreating to his chambers while the courtroom buzzed with speculation. He closed the door and leaned against it, the prenup still clutched in his hand. His own signature mocked him from the page, evidence of the man he'd been, helping a stranger protect her heart while his own remained locked away. James appeared without knocking, as brothers do. I saw the live updates. Mark, are you okay? She came to me, Marcus whispered. After I destroyed her, after I told her love was impractical and dreams were foolish, she came to my office asking how to protect herself from being hurt again. And I didn't even recognize her. But you helped her anyway, James said quietly. You gave her the tools she needed, even when you didn't know who she was. That means something. Marcus shook his head. I spent 15 years convincing myself I made the right choice. That love fails, that marriage is just a contract, that emotions weaken judgment. And all this time, Sophia was living proof of what I'd created, someone so afraid of being hurt that she married for safety instead of love. So what are you going to do? James asked. Marcus looked at the prenup, then at his reflection in the window. For the first time in his career, the answer wasn't clear. The law was straightforward. Victor had violated the prenup's good faith provisions, concealed assets, and entered the marriage with documented intent to protect himself from its failure. Sophia deserved everything the agreement entitled her to. But this wasn't about law anymore. It was about the fact that he'd helped build the walls around Sophia's heart, and now he had the power to either validate her fears or show her that protection and hope could coexist. When he returned to the courtroom, the silence was absolute. Sophia sat with her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Victor looked furious but contained, clearly confident his money and power would prevail as they always had. Marcus settled into his seat and looked directly at Sophia. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need your honest answer. When you came to my office 13 years ago, did you know it was me? Diana started to object, but Sophia raised her hand gently. Yes, Your Honor. I knew. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus held up his hand for silence. Why didn't you identify yourself? Sophia's voice was steady, but her eyes held oceans of pain. Because I wanted to see if the man who taught me that love was impractical would at least help me protect myself from its absence. I needed to know if you believed the things you said, or if some part of you still understood that hearts need safeguarding, even when they're broken. And what did you conclude? Marcus asked, his professional mask slipping. That you were a better man than you believed yourself to be, Sophia said softly. You drafted provisions that required honesty, good faith, mutual respect. You couldn't bring yourself to create a document that was purely transactional. Even cynical, you still protected hope. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, 15 years of carefully constructed armor splitting apart. He'd been so certain he'd chosen correctly, that eliminating emotion from his life had made him stronger, clearer, more effective. But Sophia had seen through him, seen that even in his most guarded moment, he'd built escape routes for love to return. He looked at Victor, who sat smugly, convinced that his wealth would overcome a technicality. Then Marcus looked at the prenup, at the words he'd written. This agreement exists not to prevent love, but to ensure that marriage, if entered, is built on honesty and mutual respect rather than deception and self-interest. His younger self had been wiser than he'd known. Mr. Ashford, Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of repressed conviction. You entered into marriage with Ms. Chen while concealing substantial assets. You documented your intention to protect yourself from divorce before the marriage even began. You systematically isolated your wife, controlled her finances, and destroyed her artistic career. The prenuptial agreement clearly states that such actions constitute breach of good faith. Victor's lawyer stood. Your Honor, that prenup was obtained under false pretenses. It was obtained, Marcus interrupted, by a woman who'd learned that trust without protection is vulnerability. Mr. Ashford signed a legal document without reading it. That's not fraud on Ms. Chen's part, that's negligence on his. And more importantly, even if we set aside the prenup entirely, the evidence presented shows a pattern of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and deliberate concealment of marital assets. Marcus paused, looking at the packed courtroom, at the reporters ready to broadcast his every word. For years, he'd ruled from a place of cynicism, efficiently dissolving marriages while telling himself he was just facing reality. But reality wasn't that love always failed. It was that love without honesty, respect, and protection couldn't survive. I rule in favor of Sophia Chen, Marcus declared, his voice ringing with certainty. Ms. Chen is entitled to full disclosure of all marital assets, including those concealed in offshore accounts and shell corporations. Per the prenuptial agreement's breach provisions, she is entitled to 60% of the total marital estate, plus compensation for the career damage inflicted during the marriage. Additionally, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of Mr. Ashford's finances to ensure complete compliance." The courtroom exploded. Victor shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal this to every court in the country." "You can't." "I can, and I have," Marcus said firmly. "Your appeal is your right, Mr. Ashford, but I suspect any appellate court will find the same pattern of deception and control that I found here. You didn't want a marriage, you wanted an acquisition. The law doesn't protect that." Victor stormed out, his lawyers scrambling to follow. Reporters rushed after them, shouting questions. But Marcus's attention was on Sophia, who sat perfectly still, tears finally streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from something that looked like relief. Diana embraced her client, whispering congratulations. But Sophia's eyes remained on Marcus, and in them, he saw a question he didn't yet know how to answer. As the courtroom cleared, Marcus sat alone at the bench, staring at the prenup that had traveled 13 years to return to him. He'd spent more than a decade believing that signing divorce decrees was the only honest thing he could do, acknowledging that marriages end, that love fades, that emotion clouds judgment. But Sophia had shown him something different. She'd shown him that protection and hope weren't opposites. That you could safeguard your heart while still leaving room for it to heal. That sometimes the most important signature wasn't the one that ended something, but the one that promised to try again despite the risk. Marcus picked up his pen and began writing his formal opinion, knowing that this case would likely define his career. But more importantly, knowing that it had already redefined his life. Outside the courthouse, he knew Sophia would be waiting. And for the first time in 15 years, Marcus Brennan wasn't afraid of what came next. The courthouse steps were slick with evening rain by the time Marcus finished his paperwork. He'd deliberately taken longer than necessary, reviewing every detail of his ruling, ensuring it would withstand any appeal Victor's team might launch. But really, he was stalling, terrified and hopeful in equal measure about what waited outside. Sarah knocked gently on his chamber door. "Sir, there's someone in the courthouse garden. She's been there for 2 hours." Marcus's heart stuttered. "Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah, clear my calendar for tomorrow. I'm taking a personal day." She smiled knowingly. "First one in 6 years, Your Honor. It's about time." The garden was a small courtyard between the courthouse and the parking structure, rarely used except by lawyers grabbing quick phone calls between hearings. Rain pattered on the stone pathways, and in the center, beneath a covered gazebo, Sophia stood looking at a sculpture of justice, blindfolded, scales balanced. She'd changed from her courtroom suit into jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked more like the girl he'd loved than she had all week, and it nearly broke him. "You waited," Marcus said, approaching slowly. "I've been waiting for 15 years, Sophia replied without turning around. 2 more hours weren't difficult. Marcus stepped under the gazebo shelter, close enough to see the raindrops caught in her hair. "I'm sorry, Sophia. For everything. For choosing fear over you. For making you believe that love was impractical. For helping me when I needed it most." Sophia interrupted gently, finally facing him. "For writing a prenup that protected not just my assets but my dignity. For ruling fairly today even though it meant facing everything you've spent years running from." "I didn't recognize you that day in my office," Marcus confessed. "I was so miserable, so determined to prove I'd made the right choice by letting you go, that I couldn't see past my own pain." "I know," Sophia said. "That's why I didn't tell you who I was. I needed to see if the Marcus I'd loved was still in there somewhere, buried under all that cynicism. And he was, in every clause you wrote, in every protection you built into that agreement. You couldn't help yourself. Even believing love was impractical, you still created space for it to be real." Marcus moved closer, his hands shaking. "I've spent 15 years telling myself that I was being logical, that I was just facing reality about marriage and love. But the truth is, I was just a coward. I was terrified that if I followed you to Paris, if I chose art and uncertainty over law and security, that I'd fail. That you'd realize I wasn't enough. So I pushed you away first." "And I let you," Sophia admitted, her own voice breaking. I was so hurt that I ran, to Paris, to my art, and eventually to Victor. I told myself I was being practical, choosing stability over passion. But I was just as scared as you were. Scared that if I fought for us, I'd lose anyway. The rain intensified, drumming on the gazebo's roof like applause. Marcus reached out, his fingers barely brushing Sophia's hand. I watched hundreds of marriages end in my courtroom. I told myself I was being realistic, efficient. But really, I was punishing everyone else for the choice I made with you. Every divorce I signed was me telling myself I was right to let you go. Were you? Sophia asked, and the question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. No, Marcus said firmly. I was absolutely, catastrophically wrong. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away because I was too afraid to believe that love could survive imperfection. Sophia's tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. I married Victor because I'd convinced myself that you were right, that love was just a beautiful delusion, and safety was the only honest choice. But safety without love is just another kind of prison. I know, Marcus whispered. I've been living in one for 15 years. They stood in silence, the years between them both infinite and invisible. Finally, Sophia spoke. I didn't come to your courtroom by accident, Marcus. When Victor filed for divorce, I could have requested any judge in the district. But I requested you. Marcus's breath caught. Why?